At a high level, the same great old content that we're going to be going through. So welcome once again to another Stoneridge Confab. My name is Scott Frappier, and I'm really looking forward today to really go over some of the capabilities and hacks and tips and tricks that I've kind of learned, obviously on the Dynamics 365 side and also on the Power Platform. Today's going to be just across a lot of different products and a lot of different capabilities. And really the goal here is to make it so that at a high level, you can actually take these tips and tricks and then use them whether you're using Business Central, F&O, Power Platform, CE, and technically even other solutions that are non-Microsoft as well. So do a couple of things that are housekeeping here, and then we'll start moving forward a little bit more as well. So first and foremost, if this is your first Stoneridge Confab, high level, this is a place where we can go ahead and really highlight all the different types of technologies that are in the business application space. So Stoneridge Software is a partner, a Microsoft partner that focuses on all Microsoft to really address the needs of an organization. And I've been with the organization now for almost 11 years, and it's just been a lot of fun to see the channel grow and the capabilities grow as well in the background. So, you know, at a high level here, we're really looking forward to kind of sharing that knowledge. Confab, like I said, if you haven't been on here, is all about just interactivity. If you have questions at all, feel free to post them in the chat. If you've got ideas or concepts that you'd like to see, we'd love to actually have you interact with us, obviously. Sometimes this is just more learning as we go through it. Other times it is actually very interactive depending upon the topic, right? So the net result here, though, is if you have questions, feel free to actually ask them. You can comment in LinkedIn. You can actually go ahead on YouTube and post a comment in there as well. Or you can go on Twitch as we do stream to 3 different providers as we go through this every single week. So hopefully everyone's had a fantastic week. I actually got back from New Orleans this last weekend. It was a lot of fun. What happens in New Orleans stays in New Orleans, but I will tell you at a high level, it was a narrator event for my wife, and it was just fantastic. So before Labor Day, before school starts for our children in the Minnesota area here, obviously it's really nice to be able to get out and then enjoy that, and then kind of move from there, obviously, as we now really get back into that back to school mentality, as our kids now have been at school now for a couple days, and I'm sure a bunch of you probably have your kids at school as well. So with that, let's go ahead and go through some of the concepts here in terms of automation and some of the tips and tricks and hacks that we can use to really make this experience even better, right? And I'm going to start with some really basic ones as we go through this, and then we're going to basically progress in advancement level as we go through this. My intent isn't to be perfect in the examples, but what I do want to do is I want to make it so that you can obviously pause this video and then check, for example, what I did and why I do it, because there's just a lot that people talk about, like what you do with it, but they don't give anything in terms of the content as to why, or even like how do you debug? Like, how do you fix? How do you like grow and learn off of it, right? So today I've got a couple of those that I even shared with a prior demonstration I did while in New Orleans. So it's going to be, like I said, a really fun and action-packed day as we go through that. It's not my house, as you can see. My background changed. So with that, let's go through and talk about like some of the different types of automation that we can really cover inside of really a business system. And the first one I like to really talk about really is going to be if you think about like notifications, right? Every system has some type of notification architecture typically built into it, right? And on the dynamic side, we've got a lot of those capabilities. And for this particular one, I really wanted to focus more on what we call alerts, for example, inside of the finance and operations platform. Now, like I said, we're going to expound on this. We're going to build so that way we can actually talk about like what happens if I want to expand more complex notifications, or if I want to have like approvals that are involved as part of that, right? And we're basically going to go through that train of thought. And then what we're also going to do is we're going to talk through really where the Power Platform then plays into this, that we can use then from a BC, F&O, sales, field service perspective, so you know what you can do there as well to really expand some of those automation needs. And that kind of brings me to one of my big points I wanted to make today. Remember, we've got this AI hype going on, like you wouldn't believe, right? With Copilot and the enablement around that inside of the Microsoft platform. And it's a fantastic capability. But I will tell you, in the experiences that I am having with leaders at different organizations, there's still a lot of trepidation around it. And the reason for it is because the definition of how we use AI inside of our business systems, even with the use of Copilot, we don't have a lot of use cases, right? We don't have a lot of experience around that. And so there's a lot of investment that's occurring around that. Now, one of the things that we've talked about at Stoneridge is the fact that we don't want to look at it as an AI problem. We want to look at it as an automation problem. Obviously, we're going to align to the marketing capabilities. We're going to do the tooling from our staff and consulting perspective. But if you really get to the core of why we're even trying to build AI-centric systems, it's because of that automation gap that we're starting to feel in my generation and in other subsequent generations, where that labor force is not as strong as it used to be. And so that means we have to do more with less. Well, how do we do that? And that is a really core component and theme around AI that I think leaders should be considering as you go through that. It doesn't mean that AI can't do some amazing things. It means that we need to think about how we can task some of these Copilot-based capabilities inside of our processes to make our lives easier, better, more efficient. And for all of us, we're going to have different goals with that. Some of us are going to be money-driven. Others are going to be family-driven. Even others are going to have blends of all of that, right, that we're going to be interacting with. So the intent here is to really show specific use cases that you can actually harness to tackle that. And just as a case in point with it, I went through a demo this week where we highlighted a very specific use case for Copilot, where we basically took, for example, some type of subcontracting resources or a subcontractor network that we had, that we made AI or Copilot go through a selection process to determine how close is that particular subcontractor to the job site that we're going to be doing this work at. How much capacity does that particular subcontractor have? How many skills of that subcontractor align to the job type definitions for that given project? And this is something, if you imagine, you would open up a schedule board, you put those characteristics inside of it, and you click on a button and you get a list that's related to it. Well, what we did with it is we used, for example, Copilot and automation and enablement around that to basically help us with that first pass. Much quicker, faster, and easier than even using, for example, a universal resource scheduling board to basically align those types of resources. So once again, there are real use cases that can help create efficiencies in time for you that do equate then to either customer experience, profitability increases, right? And the key thing here is to find a partner that's not exploring this with you on the fly. You want to have a partner that has some ideas and some concepts with it, because we're starting to see as well the Gartner reports that are saying, for example, it's 6 times more expensive to implement AI-based systems. And it's like, well, of course it is, because no one knows what they're doing yet, so they're spending time on it, and that's going to happen with an emergent technology. So, like I said, we want to bring this to the reality, we want to focus on it, and really we want to make sure then that you understand where you can use that automation to your advantage. Now, with that, pitter patter, let's get at her. I'm going to go ahead and flip over to our screen, and we're going to start talking about really the first concept, which is notifications and alerts that we can tackle inside of a business system. So I'm going to go ahead and switch my screen over. Hopefully you see me in the bottom. There I am. And then we've got our finance and operations screen up and running here. So one of the first areas I want to talk through really is about, like, how do we actually go through and make sure that if something happens, and I'm going to move my chat so if I have my team members ping me saying, Scott, you're too loud or you're going too fast, I can see it. But what I'm going to do here then is go back to it. But one of the scenarios that we typically get into is that we want to be notified when a particular event happens inside of a business, right? And many of you probably know how to do this, obviously, with Power Automate, right? And we're going to talk about that as well. But in systems that have some of the inherent notification capabilities like finance and operations, one of the tips that you can use without expanding then your Microsoft usage is to potentially then use some of the alert capabilities inside of finance and operations. Now, the reason I say this is because there's many different types of customers that are out there. An example I like to give with it is that some customers don't want to expand into the Power Platform and those capabilities because there's a learning and development type of activity that may need to occur, or there's governance issues, or it's too big maybe for what needs to occur right in that process. So like I said, what we're going to do today is we're going to look more into that to understand then exactly what we can do then from a F&O perspective, and we could obviously do this then potentially with other systems as well, and basically just kind of think through then, like, how do I want this business challenge to be addressed? Because remember, if you're leading with technology, you're doing the wrong thing in a business system. You need to lead with the business process challenge that you have, and then from there, align the technological need to be able to support it. If you have a trailer that's 15,000 pounds, you're probably not going to use a Ford F-150, even though it might be the coolest technological innovation you've ever seen, right? You've got to look at the problem through those lenses, even with software as you're going through processes. Now, in finance and operations, one of the things that we can do here is we can actually set up what are called alerts, so that when a particular event happens inside of the system, it's going to send a notification to our notification center or even externally via email, right? And that's a really important concept because some organizations, they want to have emails that are going to be there, right? That pop up into your inbox to notify you of it. There's going to be other organizations that are like, no email. We despise email, right? And what they're going to do is they're going to want to have notifications that are inside of a system, or a toast notification as we call it, where it shows up, for example, inside of the operating system or on your particular phone, right? So there's different strategies that we use obviously to tackle those, but one of the basic ones is just being able to be told when some type of an event occurs. And so alerts inside of F&O is absolutely one of those things that we can tackle as well. So Kevin, yeah, you got it. Yep. Process first, right? Always. We want to make sure we're driving off of process. Forest Runner, oh my gosh, Mr. Bull, how are you? Great to see you on the stream. Having a great day. I hope you are as well. It's been a while, so hopefully you enjoy some of the stuff that we go through here today, but it's good to hear from you. So let's go ahead and dive in just real quick. So what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to go into just a quick example here. We're going to go into, for example, our all customers. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go through and set up a notification so that when a particular event occurs, that we're going to then be notified of a particular change then inside of the environment, right? And inside of F&O, one of the areas that we have that we can interact with is basically what we call an action center inside of the UI. The action center, as you can see here, has a couple of different things that it defines, right, as you're going through your daily operations, that then kind of gives you kind of insights of where to go, what to interact with then inside of the finance and operations solution. So you can see, for example, you get work items that are assigned. So inside of Dynamics, we have the ability to do workflow, or you've got optimization opportunities as they do updates in the background. Or if you're using, for example, different capabilities, you can see that I'm getting notified that I've got a deprecated feature that I probably should take a look at because mid-September something's going to break with it, right? And then as you can see as well, we've got like jobs and things of that nature that are being notified. So this is a fantastic centralized area for end users that want to have an experience where they want to be notified then of any changes in data inside of the system within the actual application itself. So what I'm going to do here, though, is I'm going to clear this out. We're going to go ahead and then just go to a customer. And we're going to take a look at some of the different types of things that we can do then from a notification perspective. And here's a cool thing about this, team. You can do this everywhere inside of F&O. So cool things that we see, summary by Copilot, right? That summarization capability is starting to come into all the products as well. So we've got our Contoso Retail San Diego data that's inside of here. What I can do as an example is I can go to my options here, and I'm going to go click on my Manage Alerts just really quickly. and through the power and magic of quick thinking, I'm going to go ahead and delete that particular alert on purpose. And what we're going to do is we're going to go back and pretend that never happened. So I've opened up my customers that are inside of here. And what I want to do is I want to set up an alert so that when, for example, a particular field value changes, that we're going to be notified of that change. And in this example, what we can use is going to be the invoice account. So high level, think about it this way. You sell to a customer, and you also might bill a different customer, right? Well, the invoice account is who we're going to be billing. That's going to be then managing potentially that receivable then, obviously, from a customer perspective inside of our system. And maybe when people make changes to this record, other records, or a bunch of them, we want to do updates potentially for that, right? We want to be notified of that, right? So a real quick hack here is basically to set up an alert notification so that we can be informed then of when those particular events occur. So as an example, I'm going to go into my options here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and create a custom alert. So you're going to see this in all the different areas inside of the finance and operations platform, where you can basically go ahead and then set up those particular alerts inside of the system by just going to the ribbon bar on the actual record that you're interacting with to then define what that alert is going to be. I'm going to go ahead and click on my create custom alert, and we're going to give it a second to catch up here because I haven't been in this demo environment for a day or so. And what we're going to see just really quickly here is going to be a screen that pops up that then helps me go through and then define what an alert rule is inside of the solution. So as an example here, we're looking at our table. So we've got a couple of different sections maybe I should talk through. We've got obviously our alert rule definition along with a unique rule ID that's being defined with it. We have an alert me when, alert me for, alert me until, and alert me with as different types of fast tabs where we can now go ahead and populate some additional details. Now, what we can do inside of here are a couple of things, right? So one would be, for example, let's say that we're not looking at actually going through and doing updates to all these different types of records, right? Meaning we want it so that it's not field specific, but more towards like a CRUD operation. And if you don't know what CRUD is, create, read, update, or delete, right? That happens in a business system, technically inside of any type of a database engine, I'd argue as well. But if you go to your event over here, if I click on this, this is where I can then have some of that definition that goes through and says, well, is it when it's created or is it when it's deleted as part of it, right? So you can actually define then, for example, anytime a record is created, let's say you have a table that is something that your department manages, and if anyone ever adds to it, you basically want to make sure it notifies you as a part of it, right? Well, the event is where we can basically define that. Now, the reason we have the ability when we're on the customer table basically to even select additional tables is because if you think about the way that finance and operations works, what happens is a lot of the tables or the entities that are in the background are actually views that when we look at our pages, where we're actually taking that data and joining it together to present something that's easier for an end user to interact with. An example would be addresses, right? So addresses are technically a separate table inside of our solution. So if you wanted to have an event that occurred when an address change occurred, well, what you would do is you would change this potentially to the global address book. This also provides you the ability to create rules when you're not centered on a table, meaning there is setup that you can go through in the system administration of the application to add different types of alerts that maybe you want to have in mass or globally being used. So that way it's notifying particular individuals, department heads as part of it, and you can basically set those up ahead of time so that end users don't need to go through and set up custom alerts for every given scenario that they're tackling. So just note that there's some configuration here that you can do that makes this feature even more powerful. Now in this example, we're going to be looking at customers, and I'm going to actually go ahead and select a specific field on it. And everyone in chat's probably like, I know which one you're going to use, Scott. It's going to be the invoice account, right? So as you can see here, I'm basically typing in what field I want to track inside of here. And I'm going to go ahead and select that invoice account. And we can also see then that the event types have changed as well. As you can see here, the invoice account, the event has changed, is one of those particular events now that can fire, or is set to a specific value, right? So these two additional events now are exposed because I actually specified the field that I actually want to track as part of this setup. Now, another thing to note is if you look a little bit further down here is the fact that I can also now set up alerts that are more specific as well in nature. As an example, I want to be alerted when any record inside of the customer table has an invoice account modification, right? Or has an invoice account change, basically. Or maybe I want to make it so it's just specific to that one record because maybe I'm a salesperson and I've got 10 accounts that I'm managing, and this particular field, if it updates, I want to be informed immediately of that change. Or let's say that somebody comes in and I'm in the finance department and I'm in charge of keeping track of exemption numbers that are actually set up for customers. Well, if anyone modifies the tax exemption number, I want to be notified of the customer that was changed and what it was modified to, right, as part of that. So these alerts can help you then really have that passive information being then shown as more of that kind of implicit notification that you may need inside of your organization. Now, what you can also do here is you can specify it as organization-wide. And what that means then is that inside of our system, we have different legal entities. Well, I could say it doesn't matter what particular legal entity where that tax exemption number updates, I want to be informed. And so you can actually specify then, for example, that organization-wide type capability. Now, you can do things like alert me until, specify an end date. So let's say you're in charge of it for a year. You can have that inside of here and then just track it for a year. So, and then what you can also do is you can specify how you want it to alert you. Do you want it to alert you with a message saying a record was updated with the invoice account? Go check it out, right? Something like that. And who's going to be alerted as part of this? Is it the admin user? Is it a different user? Is it all company, like a claims group that's specified for it as well, right? So you can see here that you can actually then even set up different types of groups that can be used then for those particular notifications that are inside of the system, which is a pretty cool feature because if you think about department level type notifications, you may want to have multiple people that are involved with it. So you're probably getting some hacks in here, right, as you're going through this that you're like, I never knew that alerts could actually be set up in that way, right? So the other things that we can do though as well is we can also do things like send an email when that particular alert occurs, or even then what we call send it externally. And what that means is that it's going to fire off a business event that you can then harness with other types of solutions like Power Automate to basically drive some of those events inside of the system. So we're not going to go into a lot more than that in terms of like the Power Platform capability here. I'm going to highlight something as a deficiency in my opinion with F&O, but I'm also going to show you a hack to get around that deficiency as well. But we can see here too is I can actually specify what that email recipient is as well as part of that process. So in this situation, we've got the customer's invoice account. We click on OK to it and wham, bam, there we go. We have now an actual alert set up inside of the system. And I can always get back to my alerts that are related then to a particular table by basically going into the options when I'm on that record and then clicking on the manage my alerts basically to see that so I can then update it potentially as well in the future. Now, what I can do here, let's go through and make that change just to prove out that it's working. I can click on the edit as an example. I can go up over to my invoice account and I can basically go ahead and say, all right, we're changing the billing relationship here to Sparrow account. We're going to save it away. And what's going to happen is that the system is going to keep track then basically of that particular event or notification that's going to occur. And that change then is going to then take a particular action. Now, here's the cool thing about the asynchronous design. And if you don't know what that means, basically, at a high level, inside of a lot of biz apps and inside of the Microsoft platform, when you talk about asynchronous, what you mean is that there's an event that occurs and you're not waiting for a response to come back to you. That response, if you did wait for it, would be what we call a synchronous process, where you're waiting for something to come back and you're synchronized basically with that process. Now, the advantage of asynchronous is that it can help with scalability, because in this situation, as an example, I made that update, but what's going to happen is that there's actually going to be a process that runs in the background that eventually then sees what that change was and then does those particular actions as that output. So as you can see here, that change has occurred, but I don't yet have a notification inside of the Action Center. Now, one of the other tips that I just want to kind of highlight here is that if you type like alert inside of F&O, you're going to see you can get the alert rules in global, right, like we talked about before. But what you can also do is you can actually set up these periodic tasks, such as, in this example, change base alerts, so that at a certain amount of time or at a certain interval, what's going to happen is it's actually going to go ahead and then notify you basically then of those changes, and you're going to then have that batch job set up. So you can see here, I went ahead and ran that. This is perfect timing. I was vamping on purpose to get to this. So we can see field invoice account changed in the table on the far right top here as we look at this. And if I click on that particular notification, we can see then that that field was changed. And what I can do then is I can click on that particular record and then get to it inside of here really quickly and easily. Now, we also enabled then that email, right? That could come out there as well. So let's go ahead and log into Outlook just really quickly here and really kind of highlight that. So I'm going to log into our Outlook account. I'm going to go ahead and sign in just really quickly here into my Stoneridge pre-sales account. So let's do Scott F at stoneridgepresales.com. There we go. Go ahead and click on next here. It's going to ask for no password because it's cached. And then what we should be able to do here is see, for example, that invoice account that actually went through and then updated. Now in mine, I've got a little automated movement thing here that's occurring. So at 11:25, as you can see here, we have that email that was sent out. So this is that email inside of this account. And you can see that when I actually said that send email externally, that we now have an email that's being sent to us. So if you think about this, now we're having the ability at the easiest or simplest level from an end user perspective to potentially then add, for example, this particular record into Outlook as an example, and we could then do like Outlook rules that are against it. Or if you're more comfortable in Outlook with Power Automate, you could have it where it could look at that particular message and then take some particular action that's related to it. So what's cool about this is that you can use these scenarios in different conditions based upon how big you are, how small you are, what your need is. And what you really need to do is just make sure, once again, that you're thinking through, obviously, being curious, as I like to say, what eventually is going to be the output of that process. Because maybe this would go to another queue, maybe it would create a case in another system, right? Maybe it would be used for SOX compliancy in another system, right? So there's just a lot of different strategies that you can use to tackle that. And the cool thing about this, if I click on that, we're going to see it's going to bring me then basically to that record inside of finance and operations, so I can then interact with it. So alerts, really cool. As you can see, you can use this pretty much everywhere really inside of F&O, and I'd really recommend, if you haven't used it, to explore it, because it's a really nice hack to basically keep that information flowing and really understanding what's changing inside of the environment. Now, beyond just that, there are a bunch of other options that we have, as you can imagine as well, when we go through and we set up different types of alerts that are inside of the system. Now, one of the things that I think is kind of a gap here that maybe some of you have experienced in the past, especially when we look at F&O and maybe even with Business Central, is the fact that some of the connectors that we have into the Power Platform aren't as expansive as maybe they should be. Hint, hint, Microsoft. Maybe someday we'll see updates with this, or maybe there's a reason why it's not supported, right? So one of those is the fact that with finance and operations, as an example, with Power Automate, you don't have the ability to actually track any table that is actually updating inside of the platform to send then, for example, or trigger a Power Automate flow to occur. And I think that this is really kind of table stakes for a lot of other systems, meaning when you have data that is updated, I may not want to use the alerts to do that because I want to then do something else with 10 other systems, or I have a more complex process that I may need to tackle. Well, in that situation, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to basically create that flow inside of Power Automate and then use the right connector to do that. So let's explore this a little bit, because this is a lot of fun, and I found out about this hack, I don't know, maybe a year or two ago, and sometimes some of the capabilities that are added into the platform don't support it natively until a subsequent version comes out, right? So once again, your mileage may vary depending upon the connector and type, but the net result is that if you're current on the platform, you should be able to use this type of capability. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to flip the screen back to one speaker. There we go. And let's go ahead and show like another scenario. Like I want to create a flow, And in that flow, what I want it to do is that when something occurs, I want it to do something. And ideally, I'd love to have it where, for example, when a record gets updated, that it would then go through and then do something with that change, right? Something really basic. Once again, this could be any CRUD operation, create, read, update, or delete. So what I'm going to do here, just as an example, we're going to click on our flows, and I'm going to create a new flow on the fly. And I'm not going to use the Copilot enablement here to start. I'm just going to go ahead and just go through a very specific use case with this, so you can kind of see then what we have the ability to do here. Now I'm going to go into my new flows, and I'm going to create an automated cloud flow, and I'm going to skip the naming convention with it because I have no idea what I want to call it yet. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually go ahead and take a look at, all right, well, I live in finance and operations. Let's use finance and operations, right? So I'm going to go fin, and what we should see here is going to be a connector that's exposed for finance and operations that I can use as a trigger. Now, within Power Automate, one of the things to note is that when you have an automated cloud flow, it's really called a trigger, right, that occurs inside of the system. And then after that trigger occurs, you have different actions that you can take inside of that flow to tackle the requirement that you may have. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and highlight the finance and operations apps, because this is typically what somebody would want to use if they had this system. And what they're going to find out really quickly is that they're probably going to be a little bit disappointed potentially. And so what do I mean by that? Well, when I click on when a business event occurs, I'll go ahead and then select, for example, basically here, the instance in my environment, which is our Stoneridge pre-sales, the category, as you can see here, are these different types of areas that I can interact with. And if I said, oh yeah, anytime a vendor is updated from an accounts payable perspective, right? Like that's where vendors would be, right? When I expose it, it's like, well, wait a second, where's my vendor table, right? Oh, when an invoice approval journal is posted, so when something is posted or when something's matched, that's when I can fire a flow. So the thing to note within F&O is the fact that the connector from a Power Automate perspective integrates with the business event framework that we have inside of the solution. And that's not a bad thing, because there are a lot of exposed business events that then you can really use to automate, as you can imagine, those particular scenarios that you may need. But what happens when it's not in that scenario, right? What happens when there is something that is updating that doesn't have a business event related to it? Well, the way you get it to work in F&O then is that you have to create code in the business event framework to then expose that event. And there are reasons for that. There's some performance scenarios and enterprise-based scenarios that you want to consider when doing that. But if you're not at a huge level and you're more common mid-market, lower-end enterprise maybe as part of it, or corporate to what we call low-end enterprise as part of it, you may want to have this addressed a little bit differently, right? So just let's go through one example on what you can do then as a hack here to make this work, and then we'll go through obviously then what we can do from a more true hackish type way as we go through this process. So what I'm going to do here just really quickly in the background, let's get some nice music going in the background here for me. We'll do Roller Mobster. I'm going to make it so that basically when a purchase order is confirmed that we're going to have some particular action that's going to occur, right? So as an example inside of here, what I could do is I could say, yep, you know what, when procurement and sourcing is occurring, and when we have, for example, a purchase order that is going to be confirmed or status changed, and actually we may want to do this in our purchase orders, I apologize, not in our procurement. What I can do here then is say, hey, when a purchase order is confirmed inside of a specific legal entity, and this is our demo environment, so we have, for example, USMF, which is our US manufacturing company, I want to do something, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up to my business event, and I'm using the older layout here as you can see, but what I could also do is rename this and say when a purchase order is confirmed. And this is a very big hack and tip that I'm going to mention. Name inside of your flow, inside of the steps, the action that is occurring or the event that is occurring inside of it, right? So that way when you're actually looking up, for example, what to use potentially inside of the actual automate, you're able to then see that particular detail. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go from the ground up very quickly, because these steps that I go through are a pattern that you should consider, especially if you don't know what data is actually traveling with this particular business event. So what do I do to tackle that? Well, I go in a couple of different steps. The first thing that I do is I'll go through and name this and say, when a purchase order is confirmed, do X. So I'd have something maybe set up in terms of really what that automate name is. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a new step, and I'm going to use a little known, or actually probably often known for a lot of the developers that are out there, action or operation inside of our automate or inside of our flow that is called compose. Why am I using this? Well, when data is being sent, you want to have really quickly, you want to understand what that payload is. And what a payload is basically what is the data that comes with that purchase order is confirmed, so we can start really breaking out then how we can use it in subsequent actions. And the best way to do that is to go straight to the source, which is when the automate fires or when the flow fires, what is the actual data that's there? So compose allows me, for example, to take the body or the content of this purchase order confirmation or when it's confirmed. So that way, when I test this, I'm able to then see what that data payload is, so I can then take subsequent potential steps to then break that out. And this is a hack you can use with any system. And I use this design pattern because it's a lot faster than trying to go to the reference documentation that's not always accurate as well to get the details that are related to it. So as an example here, I'm going to just leave it as a compose. I'm going to save it away. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and then test this. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the test action, and we're going to manually then trigger this so that when a purchase order confirmation occurs, it should fire this off. So let's go ahead now and wait for it. We can see it's waiting for our input with it. Let's go into F&O. Let's go back over into our main menu. Let's go to our purchase orders, right, which would be purchase order prep would be a good workspace for that, right? So we'll go into our purchase order prep workspace. I'm going to look at my all purchase orders. And of course, I would not be the demo person I am without actually having a purchase order kind of ready for this conversation, so we can kind of show then what that capability is. So we're going to go ahead and expose all purchase orders here in just a quick second. And then what we're going to see then is that a purchase order list that has then an order that I have inside of the system for a company that manufactures everything office supplies. And we're going to go ahead and do some updates to it. So as you can see here, I've got my HDMI cables that are inside of here. It's actually in a confirmed state right now. It looks like another pre-sales architect might be enabling workflow inside of here, so we'll see if this works. I'm going to go ahead and basically take this particular one, and what we're going to do is we're actually going to go ahead and then make a change that's related to it. So you can see here on the purchase order side, what I have the ability to do is actually go through and then, for example, even request changes that are inside of here. And in this example, we can see that we have a particular purchase order enabled, and I can basically go ahead and request that change, and then based upon workflow, it's actually going to do that particular process. Now in this example, we have it set up now as a draft, and if I come into my pieces and I actually go through and edit it, what I should be able to do is change the quantity that's related to this and then go through that reconfirmation process, right? I just want to check one thing real quick, team, here, because maybe we've got one that's older than the other one inside of here, and it looks like this one is confirmed. So on this one, I'll use it because I don't have workflow enabled on it. And let's go to 120 that we're going to do. I'm going to get some pop-ups maybe that go here. It says you have specified a quantity, but the maximum is 100. Do you want to use 100? Nope, don't tell me what to do, system. I know what I'm doing here. Hopefully, I'm going to go ahead and then save that away for that change that's inside of here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to see that this particular status moves obviously from confirmed, hopefully into an approved state. And we'll see that because right now we've got some pre-sales architects that are obviously getting ready for demo, and I hope I'm not going to break anything with it. So we're going to see here just really quickly as it goes through and processes that change as back to approved. I'm going to go back into my purchase and then confirm that. And then this should be basically that event potentially that Power Automate really focuses on. So that way we have basically a notification then that occurs inside of the system. So we're doing the confirmation process inside of here. Basically, that's just making sure that everything is good to go. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back over to my flow here, and we're going to see that that flow eventually ran. And as you can see here, it ran successfully as well. So in this example, from a compose perspective, what I can now do is I can look at what is the data that came from that purchase order confirmation, right? And this is where it just gets really kind of fun, right? So what I can do is I can click on then my compose, and I can see, for example, the input that came into the compose operation and then what it outputted if there was some type of like formula that I applied then into that compose. Because remember, what I did is I went ahead and put in the body of when the purchase order is confirmed, but you can do formulas right inside of Power Automate that you could then modify, format, or change potentially values inside of here. But the key is that the input here is telling me all the different fields that are traveling then when that purchase order is confirmed. So I can see the business event, I can see the context of the record, I can see, for example, the purchase type, and what I can do is I can basically take that content and then copy it, right? So if I go ahead and just highlight all this and Control C it, now I've got basically the values that are inside of here. And what I want to do now is I want to actually take this, I don't want to make it so I can use these fields in other actions potentially, such as if I'm going to send an email, I want to have the field of the purchase order number or the amount or the transaction currency that's there. And by default, inside of the business events, you don't get that. So just let's show that, right? So what I'm going to do, we copied that. I'm actually going to put it into Notepad real quick here in the background so that way I don't lose it. And what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and re-edit this flow to keep expanding off of it. Now let's say I wanted to send an email, right? So I'll do a new step inside of here and we'll do mail as the option. And if I select then Office 365 Outlook, such as create an email, right, as part of this. So we got to find our create email inside of here, and I'm getting older and my eyes are not as quick as they used to be. Create maybe is what I can say. There we go. Create contact. Oh, maybe I did the wrong one. See, this is the wonderful thing about Power Automate 2 is that you better know what you're interacting with, right, to be able to send those particular mails. So we'll do mail again. And you may use, for example, mail. Maybe you're going to do, you know, the native mail that's in here. Maybe it's going to be Outlook 365. It looks like my action was incorrect, so it's going to be send email with options. Well, I want to send this then to scottf@stoneridgepresales.com, right, as an example. So we're going to go ahead and select that. And then it's like, well, wait, where's the, oh no, right? And then you're just like, how do I do this, right? So what you can do though, I want to show you how to get past this, right? Because any type of business event then from F&O, you can use this design pattern with. So remember when we ran that process before, we got this, right? And what we can do is we can take this and we can use another action inside of Power Automate to basically go through and expose then the different fields that we can interact with. So let's try that. I'm going to just take that away just as a second. I'm going to create an action in between the compose. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do an action called parse JSON. Now the data that came to us from the business event is actually in what we call a JSON format, right? I don't remember I think it's JavaScript object something, not notification. Anyways, it's a format that defines basically collections, fields, values, different data types, you name it, that are related to it, right? And one of the things that you may want to do is take that JSON as an example, and you're going to want to go through and then use that or define what those fields are, so then you can use it in subsequent actions. So what I can do is I can say parse JSON. And what I can say here as an example is I could rename this and I could say purchase order event details, right? And I can say take the content. I can do it from Compose, but usually you use Compose just to kind of look at things. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to use the body of the purchase order confirmed event, and I'm going to generate the schema from that sample that we just took from the Compose. So I'm going to click on that generate sample. I'm going to paste that in here. So that's the same value, right? That's inside of here. And I'm going to click on done. And what we're going to see now is that we have really a formatted type value here that we can use then inside of the solution to then add fields then to our subsequent actions. So as an example now, if I minimize this and we go back to our send email with actions, I can now do things like purchase order, and look at this, purchase order event details, right? So we're looking at this, and so now I'm going to go to my purchase order number, and I'm going to say has been confirmed, right? So very basic, right? But it's one of those things that if you haven't done it before, it's really confusing. But if you use this design pattern when you're doing any type of automate, whether or not you're an end user that's looking to manually do something potentially, or a developer where you've got a more complex formatted JSON object that comes from F&O, use this design pattern basically to tackle this very quickly and rapidly to address then any of those field value needs. And as you can see here, then you can go even further with attachments. Here's the body, and I could say, for example, purchase order, right? I don't know, was confirmed on and is part of legal entity, right? You get the hint, right? So either way, use that pattern to make it a lot easier for you. Now, here's the thing that's interesting about all this still. Still doesn't address that core problem, right? What happens if I want to make it so that when somebody adds an asset condition, that it updates me when that asset condition gets updated? All right, let's go through that scenario with it. Now, one of the things that you should be doing inside of your environment, if you're an F&O environment, is you should be linking that to a Dataverse environment. Some of you may not be at that stage, but longer term here, one of the things to note is that with the finance and supply chain solution, the Dataverse-centric approach that Microsoft is tackling is going to have it where really F&O data lives in Dataverse, right? When we have that already to a degree, and we have that through what we call our dual write framework. So this is a feature, though, that we can enable without using the dual write framework. So this is how now we get to, for example, modifications to data that we want to incorporate into Power Automate. Now, one of the ways that you could do it, the old-fashioned way to do it, was you would come into your purchase orders, or you would come into, your event. You would say, for example, when an alert occurs, right? So I'll expose that just to show just really quickly here. When alert rule is triggered, then take that alert rule, for example, and then do something with it. So let's say you've got like hundreds of alerts that you've set up inside of your environment, and you don't want to, or you can't link to Dataverse, or you don't want to then interact basically with Dataverse, or don't want to add a new business event through a custom coding event as an example. Well, what you can do is you can actually set it up so that when there's an alert rule that's triggered, that then basically it will then call this Power Automate, right? Because it's going to be an event then that occurs inside of the system. But remember, you're going to have to do a couple steps then with that. You're going to have to do the compose to figure out what is that data inside of that alert that you're trying to tackle. And then you're probably going to have to add an action, for example, in finance and operations, if I expose it here just really quickly, to basically go grab that record too, right? So you're going to have to use the get record so that you have the context of the detail of that particular alert, right? And it's just, it works. And like I said, if you've got a lot of alerts that are already set up inside of your environment, it's probably a really quick and easy way then to get it where you can then use Power Automate to address some of those needs. But let's say you're starting from scratch and you're not wanting, you want to keep alerts centralized inside of finance and operations, but then you want it so that there are data updates that occur inside of F&O that you basically then can have an automate that fires against it. Well, how do you do that? Well, first off, you got to go through the dual write setup, and you have to go through what we call our virtual entity setup. We don't have time on stream today to go through that in detail, but the net result is that you're going to basically go through and get those environments linked, where, for example, my sales finance environment is actually linked then into this particular F&O environment as part of my dual write setup. Now, what I can do inside of here is I can go to my all tables, and what I can search for is available, right? So I'll use that keyword with it. And what it's called is the available finance and operation entities that are inside of the system. I can go into, for example, that available finance and operations entity table inside of Dataverse here. And what I should see in a moment is going to be every single table that I can actually expose then through a virtual entity inside of the system so that I have a table inside of Dataverse. I bet you some of you kind of know where I'm going with this now. So on this one, as an example, before demo here today, if I go ahead and we look at the additional rows that are inside of here, and we'll just give it a second to kind of pop up and show this. But what you can do is you can identify basically the table that you want to expose as a virtual entity inside of Dataverse. And a virtual entity, if you're a developer, if you've been big in technology in the past, one of the ways I like to relate it is that it's almost like a SQL view where you have data that is actually, it's almost like a linked server SQL view would actually be a better way maybe to say it, where you actually have data that resides in a different environment or database, and then when that environment calls for records or data around that, what it does is it reflects into it, but it never stores that data typically inside of Dataverse. Now there's always exceptions to the rule, right? So offline sync mode, things like that, there are setups that we enable obviously to drive that. But one of them here that I exposed before demo was this asset condition entity that's inside of here, right? So in this example, what we're able to do is take a specific table or entity that we have set up inside of F&O and then expose that. And so what I should now see if I go, for example, into, once again, our tables, so we'll go back into our tables, we'll click on all inside of here, and then I'm going to go ahead and do condition just to show it. What I should see now is a fixed asset condition table that is inside of Dataverse. And if I click on that condition table, what I should be able to see then are all these different conditions. Now you're looking at this and you're probably like, wait a second, Scott, that's got like multiple values that are inside of here. Well, remember, there is uniqueness inside of F&O when we actually have, for example, the different type of company codes that then relate to it. Because when we integrate with Dataverse, we're exposing that table globally or that entity globally, and then what we're doing is that we're filtering it based upon that company code to then refine what those values are. So if I filter, for example, on USMF inside of here, so we'll filter by USMF inside of here, I should see some specific conditions that are inside of here. Excellent, fair, good, and poor. So let's go take a look at this. Let's go over into our F&O area. Let's go into our assets. So I'm just going to go into up here, my main menu. We're going to go into our fixed assets. And one of the tables that I'm going to be tracking now, if I go to this particular fixed asset, is going to be down here, this asset condition. You can't see on the mouse, it's on the bottom right. I'm going to right click on it. I'm going to view the details related to that table. And here we have our fixed asset conditions. Now, some of these tables, remember, you can actually go ahead and search for them up in the search and access it that way then through setup if you wanted to. I want to show where it is related to the master record, so that way if you want to see it, you can interact with it. But here we have excellent, fair, good, and poor. Excellent, fair, good, and poor, right? Pretty easy. All right, let's go through the pattern now. So I'm going to go into my flow, and what I'm going to do is I'm now going to create a Power Automate, and this Power Automate now is going to be more focused on, you can guess it, on changes or updates or any type of modification basically to that record. If I click on my new flow, we'll do a new automated cloud flow. Once again, I always love to skip to go through this. And then inside of here, what I'm going to do is I'm not going to use finance and operations. I'm going to use Dataverse. And as you can see here, what I can do is I can select our newer Dataverse component, and I can say when a row is added, modified, or deleted, right? So I can go ahead and select that. And basically here I can say, as an example, great, when it's added or deleted, okay? As an example as well, I can go through all of these different types of areas, right, to define that, to basically state what's that table name. So as an example, I'm going to do condition right inside of here, and we can see fixed asset condition along with even the MSERP postfix, prefix, whatever it is, post value, is here that I can now interact with. So I can say, for example, for this entire organization, I want this particular event to occur, right? So when a fixed asset condition is added or deleted, right? And once again, work on your design patterns on what you want the naming with this, because it's nice to be able to have a more consistent view and grouping that's related to it. It's up to you, though, that to drive that. So in this example, I'm going to say, I'm going to rename this, and we're going to call this the fixed asset condition. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do you guys guessed it, the compose, right? Because I want to see what data is actually inside of that. So we'll type in compose here, and what I should hopefully get in a second is going to be really that data inside of here. So there it is. Click on our compose inside of here, and then I'm going to save this away to start. Oh, got my error message, of course. I did this before. Let's go ahead and say I want to compose based upon the body, once again, of this particular value that's inside of here. Now, here's the cool thing about Dataverse, though. Like, if I wanted to then do, like, mail, for example, like we did with the other one, with the business event, if I want to send an email with options inside of here, what I can do, I'll do Scott F again as well with this just to kind of highlight it. On our subject here, Dataverse exposes the fields that are there, the values that you can interact with. So there's another hack or strategic advantage then to using the Dataverse connector potentially to drive this. Now I'm going to get rid of this because I don't want to do this in this portion of our presentation. I'm going to go ahead and delete this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and save this away again, and we're going to test it, right? So if I click on my test, I should be able to manually trigger this. And remember, this is looking at a table in Dataverse, not technically in finance and operations, but through the virtual table setup inside of our solution, it's actually then reflecting that into finance and operations. So if you're like me, maybe you're an Aladdin fan. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a new rating related to this, and we're going to call it phenomenal. Phenomenal cosmic powers, right? So phenomenal cosmic powers that we have here, right? So this is where we're actually going through and then updating or creating a record inside of F&O, right? And I'm not in Dataverse. I'm not doing any of those particular actions inside of there. But what we're going to see in a second here is that automate fired based upon the virtual entity inside of Dataverse based upon data that we updated inside of F&O. So if you're a BC fan, guess what? You can kind of do the same thing as well, right? So in this example then, what we have is the fixed asset condition that then was updated, modified, or deleted. And then if I look at my compose, you can see here that I have all this detail of that particular condition that is occurring inside of here as well. So this allows me then to create data-driven events for automation that I can use inside of an environment to really drive that forward. Now, that's not, obviously, we've gone through so many tips and hacks, hopefully, that you've kind of learned on like design patterns and things that you can use to really drive, your efficiency when doing this. The last one I do want to just talk about, we're not going to have time to go into a lot of detail with it though, is how do I use AI to make this even better, right? And I will challenge you to do this because there's some really cool things that even we are doing now with this to really drive this forward. So AI is really good at taking lots of bits of information, emails, and basically being a word calculator. We've talked about this on stream before, where an email that comes to me is really good to be summarized or activities potentially to be taken based upon email content because it's really good at predicting what it should be responding to. Look at it, I don't know, this is kind of probably, I like to relate to human beings and biology a lot in my career. Emotions. Emotions are the first reaction we have with something based upon stimulus that we interact with typically inside of our work. That's why we have emotions, quite candidly. So what's cool about this then, though, is the fact that you can use a very similar pattern then to address some of the very first needs inside of a process potentially by using AI enablement. And how do we do that? Well, AI prompts is really where we look to be able to drive that. So an AI prompt allows me to basically create, for example, even custom prompts inside of here that allow me to take particular actions and then access data to then make it better, right? To be more informed with it, or to take a particular action, maybe even empathing that's related to it. So when you create a custom prompt, as an example, you have this that now comes for the layout, where I've got my prompt, my response, and then my settings that are on the far right here. Now what I'm doing is I'm saying I want to take an email address that I have for sample data that I've set up inside of here. And what I want to do is I want to look at the account table inside of Dataverse to then see, for example, if there is a value there, right? So as you can see, my prompt here is saying, is an email address associated with this account inside of our system. Now in this example, if I come into my tests, so you want to test this through, right? And I say, for example, that it's not Frappier, but it's frappy35@hotmail.com as an example, and I click on the test prompt that's related to it, because I've actually inside of this prompt enriched it by using data that looks at then that account table, what I'm able to do is actually then use really this large language model or this AI-based capability to then bring me back results. Now here's the cool thing about this. You can see here that I've formatted it like a JSON object, right? So we just talked about how you could take then this JSON object, bring it over into Power Automate, generate from schema, and what we're going to have is this exists in data is a field now that we can use inside of our Power Automate for things like conditions. So let's say, for example, that there wasn't that particular account that was set up and we had an email that was sent to us, and we could even go further than that. We could have it where it actually parses the body of that email, and AI then identifies, for example, is there a product or service or need or criticality of this particular email that we can use to figure out pathing on where that automate can go without having to program every single regex expression to basically go through and then identify basically what those values are or what we want it to do. So in this example, the output that I've defined for it is in JSON. Now you could do it in text as well, right, as part of it. So if I test that prompt again and I leave it as text, well, what we're going to see is it's going to basically say, I'm sorry, there's not there. Please contact your system administrator, right, or as a part of it. Or if I do it in JSON as an example, we're going to see that it's going to be formatted then based upon the format that you define for it. And in the edit here, this is where you can actually go through and define what that format is going to be. And the cool thing about it is I just gave an example of the custom format inside of here, and then it did the rest for it and said, all right, you must mean if it exists in data that it exists in the account record, which I think is really cool as well, right? So this allows us then to create AI-enabled solutions to then do that parsing, to do that conditional formatting with it, and then what you can do inside of a Power Automate, as an example here, is that you can go into your flow, and we'll just pick on any random flow that I have in here in the interest of time, and I'll say when a fixed asset is changed or deleted, I'll edit this just really quickly to show it. I'm going to go ahead and then add then another action inside of here, and that action, as an example, is going to be our AI builder. And in our AI builder, we should have prompts, right, that we should be able to interact with, right? So these prompts then allow me basically to go through and define then what that particular value is going to be, right? So classify text and categories, custom models. You can use then AI builder basically to go through and then use that particular prompt inside of here to basically then align what that value is going to be. So we've got a custom prompt that we're using inside of here. The email address is sfrappier@gmail.com as an example. And we'll go ahead and then just save this just really quickly inside of here. So we've got this now prompt that's going to run in the background. We'll do that test in a second. Doesn't have a content approval action. Okay, I don't know if that matters right now. I remember that they removed it and then they add that and then they removed it. We'll just see what happens here. So in this example, once again, we'll do a new fixed asset condition and we will say, geesh, I'll do Aladdin. It's got to be that theme, right? So save that away inside of here, and then we'll see if it actually comes back as we kind of wrap up here. But as you can see, this is really powerful because you can now use then that AI builder based capability to go through and then create those custom type prompts. And we're going to see if it fails or it doesn't fail right as we go through this. And this is the wonderful thing about doing it on Confab. We're going to do it live every time, right? So in this situation, what we should see is that that AI builder custom prompt was provided that email address detail, and then the output of that particular GPT action should then as well then have that particular layout as the output. And we can see here now that the outputs, the email address is associated with an account in our system. once again, we could have actually added it inside of that particular JSON format. Like we could have had a value that says, what is the account number? So that way I could use the account number as a part of it as well. So it just starts exposing even more great capabilities that you can do from an automation perspective. And once again, these design patterns, we used F&O as a base with it, and there was some specific F&O with obviously the alerts, but you can use this with any of the Dynamics products as you go through that, and you can use it even beyond Dynamics products. So all the different connectors that are out there can be used to really drive that.